Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're joined by Dan Hon, the CEO of Very Little Gravitas, a mostly government consultancy. Dan has been the consultant on many government turnaround projects. He's also keynoted events on government contracting and software. And he's here to talk about rewriting government software, or not, as the case may be. Dan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So we got your name and information from a Wired article that came out a couple weeks ago, where the DOGE people have decided they're proposing that they're going to rewrite all of the Social Security software from COBOL to Java. Actually, I'm not sure it said Java. From COBOL to something new.
A modern language.
A modern language.
Something newer than COBOL.
Yeah, well, their lack of specificity lends great credence to their plans.
Right.
But they're going to use AI, so I guess it doesn't matter. It'll all...
Yeah, sure.
And I believe you said that something to the effect of jumping straight in like this is a great way to start if you want to fail.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think... So the journalist got in touch with me and we had something like a 1 hour long conversation because she wanted some context behind the tip that McKenna had gotten about this rewrite. And the story that she was relaying was that there was something like a proposal going around to rewrite the core business logic, to rewrite the business logic of Social Security, whatever that is.
Right.
And then to do it inside of 3 months, to essentially turn it off, whatever it is, and then to take all of that business logic and then rewrite it in something newer. And I think we can probably infer, given the people involved, that would be something newer and trendier than COBOL. So maybe something like Java, but I imagine not Java, given the people involved.
Probably not Java, but wait, I want to...
Yeah.
It's something you just said. Turn it off, because that didn't make it into the Wired article. Is the plan that they would actually turn off the Social Security platform for 3 months and then...
That is what I've heard. I noticed that didn't make it into the Wired article, so I don't know if they'd managed to source it or to back it up, enough. But I remember because I was on vacation at the time, and I kind of stepped out for lunch. I stepped out during lunch for this call, and then by the time I got back, my wife was saying, "So how did the call go?" And I'm like, well, sounds like someone wants to turn it off and then turn it on again, and rewrite it inside of 3 months, and it'll be a shit show, or it'll be the kind of Isaac was talking about this when we had a brief chat ahead of this podcast, and I think I remember saying, because McKenna was like asking, well, what's the risk going to be if they try and do this inside of 3 months? I said, well, it depends on how much you don't want to do Social Security. Like, I think we all know that you can get whatever done in 3 months if you scope it down enough, right? So it's okay. Well, if you want to replicate the entire system, we know that there are ways of doing that, right? You make sure that you've got all the test coverage, and then you can run it side by side and so on. And creating new tests and making sure that you've got test coverage is just a good thing to do anyway. And it's something that I'm sure that the teams there are already doing or already have on their roadmap. They're probably under-resourced and running late, or they might even have vendors that aren't good enough to do it. But I think we know that there are ways of approaching something like this. But when it comes down to it, I think it's more a case of, well, who do you not care about getting benefits by the time you hit 3 months? Because if you don't care about like 5% of people getting it, 10% of people getting it, or if you just want to turn it around and say, right, we're going to concentrate on, the slam dunk cases, right? So we'll say 30% of people we're absolutely sure, we can just run them through and there's nothing else that we need to do. Then maybe you might be able to do that. But if you've turned the rest of it off, and if you've got no way, and you probably all have experienced this, if you don't really have a good way to extricate that, because everything is probably, it's accreted over however many decades, right?
Right. I mean, this is still, I think I saw that's using a government created database technology from like the 70s.
Governments created databases for this, right? This is the birth of the administrative state. This is the birth of like mass, tens of millions of people bureaucracy. So it's almost as if, the technology and the software had to be created to run these programs in the first place. It's a little bit like, in the reading that I've done about EHRs, about electronic health record systems, like some of the databases that, like MUMPS, I think was a research database at a university hospital that was created for billing, and then that turned into either one of Epic or Sonos products. So it's like they run on mainframes because they were the only computers that you could have that could do this type of processing at this type of scale, and then the rest of the industry changed around them. So I think that the big thing for me, and when I said that sure, you can get whatever done in 3 months if you scope it down, I think the big thing that's different about DOGE is that you've got someone in a leadership position who's willing to just say fuck it to the current requirements, right? And to say we're actually doing something different. We want to do something that does social security, right? But they're going to effectively redefine what the requirements are. And they have the chance, because I think they just don't give any, they don't have any fucks to give, right? I think they're in a position where if you were trying to do something like a modernization or a legacy replacement, a legacy modernization, right, you'd normally have a whole bunch of users saying, oh, it has to do exactly this. We can't go live without X, Y, Z. And you've got people in leadership. You've got like basically the president saying, no, we don't.
Right. That is one of the traps in a rewrite situation.
Yeah.
You don't want to rewrite it and get the same thing out of it.
Ideally, you want something better, right?
You want something different. And that then becomes this big conflict between, you're going to rewrite it, but you have to get the same answer, which negates the purpose of rewriting it in the first place.
Right. And you don't want to get the same answer. I think what's inextricably linked with this is you've got the ideology of the people, you've got the clear politics and ideology, of the people running the project. This isn't a vendor coming in who's saying, okay, you write the requirements and then I'll do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. DOGE clearly has a point of view here. I think what's different with this, in government is that they also clearly have a policy point of view. They have a point of view on who should get benefits and who should not get benefits. In the government space, I think we've seen for a long time that you can use fraud and waste and abuse, fraud especially in a space like social services, and benefits as a way of, getting across to your, you might think that the benefits shouldn't exist in the first place, so you just look for more fraud. And when you look for more fraud, you can totally find more fraud, and then you can accidentally make it difficult to appeal those decisions if your application has been deemed to be fraudulent, right? So you can throw up all these barriers, and they just happen to make it harder for people who actually qualify to get through. It is very opposite. It would be interesting if they cared about it in the way that you see some sort of startups like care about onboarding, right? Mm-hmm. And customer acquisition, right? If you legitimately saw the goal of government or the purpose of the business in this sense, if you really want to call it a business, to say, right, we have to serve everyone, then one easy thing that you could do, if you want to rewrite it in 3 months, just pay everyone Social Security. Right?
I suppose that would work.
They could choose to do that. Like, that's a policy decision. And it's a bit like, we used to say about 10, 15 years ago in government, like the analogy used to be something like, it should be as easy to renew your driver's license, or it should be as easy to get a business license as it should be to sign up to be an Uber driver, right? Because we saw people, we saw what a great user experience there was in the private sector. We saw how easy that flow was. We saw how well it was designed. So then you can look at that, and you have people right now, so like 18F, like the US Digital Service, they were doing all of that work in terms of user experience, doing all of that work in terms of redesigning workflows and everything, and then asking questions of policy, basically asking questions of your customer when you're developing software, saying, do we still need this form? right? Do you still actually need all of this data? We already have this data. Why are we collecting it again? Why don't we just grab it from this other place? So if you wanted to do that, if you wanted to make it easier, I'm sure the team could find ways to make it easier to sign up for Social Security and easier for you to get what you might be entitled to. I have the sneaking suspicion that they're not going to be doing that. And you might even think that they would have a shit hot way. For example, if they're going to modernize something, you're going to do a rewrite, then great, do a rewrite in 3 months of appealing a decision. Start with that bit. And then you might actually win some hearts and minds in terms of, oh no, you're messing with Social Security, I'm not going to get my stuff. Well, if you started with something, if you started, with that scope smaller, saying, okay, right, we want a super great experience for, if there's been a mistake, or if you need to update your address, right, or anything like that, I'd be like, fantastic. You do that in 3 months, that's brilliant.
That's because when we had talked about it in a previous episode, we were saying, oh, well, maybe start with the whatever system generates the numbers. Right. Because then if there's a problem, you've got 65 years to correct it.
Right.
Before you have to pay out. So that's low risk. But I really like that. No, go with something that would impact the users now. Make the appeal process better.
Right.
That would be huge. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, especially when you've got a situation where you've got you've got people turning up in town hall saying, "Don't mess with my Social Security." But what if they went back and they said, "Okay, but what if we made it, not more efficient, right? Not if they were saying, okay, well, it costs too much to run, but what if they said, okay, well, you're right, it isn't efficient in the way that you can update your information. It isn't efficient in the way that you can do all these things. We actually want to make it serve you better." And I bet that they could do it, with a small, smart, super experienced team. I bet that you could do that faster than, a massive stuffed consultancy than, if you've got CGI in, or if you've got Deloitte in, or anything like that. I do believe if you've got like a smaller team of people, you can get a lot of work done.
Well, there's one thing that you touched on earlier too, that you mentioned that, if you cry fraud, it kind of gives you a sledgehammer to take to the whole thing and say, oh, this is the reason we have to go in here and fix things because the spooky boogeyman of fraud is there. And it kind of reminds me of these old conversations people had about welfare queens and people taking advantage of government housing and support there. They would go, oh, look at these few people, or I've seen some people abusing it. Therefore, the entire thing should be thrown away. And so those examples, unfortunately, people have of, oh, here's somebody, actually exploiting a part of this aid. That sells really well to people to tear the whole thing down, even though I've known people, and I myself, my own family has actually benefited from government housing and aid like that before, in good ways that weren't, trying to exploit the system. So I think that's the thing that sticks out a bit is they're not saying let's make this better. They're just saying there's fraud here and we have to make it efficient, and that's a very broad statement. And that gives them a whole blank check essentially to do whatever they want to with it.
And I think that's like an interesting lens when you look at modernization or rewrite projects in general, because it essentially goes to, well, what are you prioritizing in your product management, or what are you prioritizing in your roadmap or your backlog? Right? It's essentially, the equivalent of what's the business decision that we're making here. And that's not, that from my point of view informs technology decisions. You might have some fundamental, architecture decisions that you might need to make. But ultimately, I think one of the issues is, well, what are we actually building this for? What is this for? Because you can take the same fraud argument, right? And then I don't go to Target and I don't go to Walgreens anymore because all the stuff is locked up because someone's told a story that people are stealing too much stuff from the stores. And you don't have to do that, but that's one way of saying, okay, well, fraud is the most important thing going on here, and we've got to kind of go all out on that. And it's, I don't think anyone is saying, and I don't think if you asked anyone, Social Security is a great system, and it works. But I think if we had a more sophisticated conversation about it, which I think is starting to come out now, people are starting to say, I think there's more awareness that, COBOL sticks around. A, it it works. And I think this is probably one of the things that you talk about is why would you want to, what are the reasons to rewrite something that has essentially been rock solid for decades?
Right.
Yep.
That has been tested, you know?
Yeah, we couldn't come up with a scenario where it made economic sense because government doesn't pay developers rockstar salaries. It
No,
pays them solid salaries, and it caters to people who want to stick around. So you
exactly.
could
Yeah.
teach them COBOL.
Right. That's not, it's not hard. And it's not like you don't have a code base to teach them. And I think that kind of, starting to talk about that code base, starting to talk about the complexity there, because the COBOL, that business logic is the attempt to put into code all of this legislation, all of these regulations, and I think, I'm definitely the kind of person who I used to be a lawyer as well. So whenever anyone talks about blockchain or Web3 or smart contracts or anything like that, I'm like, that's not how the world works. You will be screwed and you won't like it one day if you're in a smart contract and you get locked in, because you will be locked in and there's no wiggle room about it. The whole art of it is, well, we have this ambiguous legislation, right? So how are we going to implement it? And we've got to make decisions around implementing it. What do we do when it conflicts with something else? A go-to story that I've got is when I worked on a modernization project in California for Medicaid, which was run by the Department for Healthcare Services. So that runs other stuff like Medi-Cal and things like that, along with, I think that's where the WIC program, the Women, Infants and Children assistance program is run. And the story that they told me, the team running that particular application, I think it was the Medicaid Management Information System. So overall, a giant, mainframe system. Yes, it's running on COBOL. I think they had minimal automated testing or anything like that. So it was still the equivalent of the 3-ring binder, run your manual tests and so on.
I've never actually seen that in person, but I can imagine.
I think these days it's the page that you keep looking for in Confluence or something like that, right?
Exactly.
In the badly maintained Confluence wiki. And they would tell a story where, they would, you'd have your update to the system and then essentially the run would fall over. The run would stop because it turned out that there was a conflict in the way that they implemented the legislation, right? The way that they implemented the rules of the program, which the people writing the rules of the program didn't even realize at the time. It's once you try to encode those rules, into the business logic and then run them, then it's like, oh, wait, these conflict. Which in a way is actually really cool because then you've got like a bug checker, essentially. You've got a really long lead time, but it's like, oh, right, this is our CI/CD for how law works. The thing falls over when we try to compile it. But I think one of the points there is you don't get to understand that. If you're going to use AI, if they say that they're going to use AI and you've got a big enough context window, you use RAG or whatever, and you throw the entire code base in. I think I made a throwaway comment about this on Blue Sky. It's like, well, that might be fine, but what you might need as well, if you're going to try and do it, is throw in all the regulations and throw in all the legislation as well. Because if you believed that would work, then I would also ask that to start writing my tests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely. Oh wait, I would always start with tests on anything that I was going to change that I didn't know how it worked.
Right.
Even if I did think I know how it worked, I would still start with the test and then change it.
And I think the only potential way that you could look at a 3-month implementation of something is you just have to start from the position of, I'm not writing, I've made a decision about test coverage. If I'm doing test coverage, right, it's going to be nowhere near, it's just going to be a tiny proportion, right, of whatever you call the system that is Social Security or the programs that make up Social Security.
Yeah, the 3-month turnaround. I think in last episode we were basically just saying, or my guess was that either you pick a tiny piece of it and say, we rewrote Social Security. Here's how we did it, and it's just like a tiny little
It'll be the website for Social
right, yeah,
Security.
and then say there's a success, or just claim success and don't really show any proof. You didn't actually rewrite anything. You couldn't succeed at it, but that doesn't stop people from just claiming, yeah, we did it. We totally did it in 3 months, and everything's perfect now.
You know what? And if they cared, for example, if Elon cared about fraud in the same way that he claims that he would make the Twitter ranking algorithm or recommendation, he'd make it open source on GitHub, and he kind of made it open source, but he didn't make, for example, the equivalent of the weights. So here's the ranking algorithm or the recommendation engine, but we're not actually going to tell you what goes into it or how that works in the first place. If they did care about transparency, if they did care about also reducing fraud, then you would also put the code for whatever you're writing inside of 3 months and make that open, because you might believe that more eyes would make any bugs there or make any holes there shallow. But again,
that is true.
I'm not entirely sure that's the kind of thing that they would do. I do know that that's the stuff that.
Sorry, I think I broke up. I was saying that Social Security is not like a classified thing. You could totally open source the code and let everyone bug bash on it if they wanted.
Sure, it's the PII and everything that is operated on. But if you want the actual business rules or anything like that, it's open in the first place, right? It's in legislation. Ideally, people should be able to understand it as easily and openly as possible. There's an argument that you could make that, making the code that runs Social Security open would be a legitimately transformative thing for government to do. It'd be to the extent that we're seeing regulators make those decisions as well. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to use code in some way to make a decision about whether someone gets parole or not, then from society's point of view, we're actually interested in how you make that decision. But I realize we're kind of getting away more and more from the technical, and then more into
we're on to more interesting problems than fraud. Well, not fraud. The claim of we're going to rewrite it in 3 months.
Yeah. And I wonder what you guys think about this because when the rumor came up about, okay, well, what if they're going to write it in Java, and then a bunch of people felt like they were laughing at them, like, oh no, you're going from COBOL to Java. Java's still super old. I'm still kind of, and it's been around for a while, and it's pretty rock solid, and you've got a variety of sources of enterprise support for it. It's really, really strongly typed. It's not particularly developer friendly in terms of how verbose it is, but it works, and you've got a whole bunch of compile time checks that you might not have with something else. I think the other end of it would be if someone nuts was like, right, we'll do it in Rust or we'll do it in Go, when it doesn't appear that there's, I'd be like, I don't really understand what the point is there. But
I'd be interested to know like the limitations too, because like in language being old is kind of a good thing. Like you get updates, it's tried, it's battle tested. So the older, if it stands the test of time, that's a great thing. So what limitations do they have that are forcing them to? I mean, why do a modern language, quote unquote? Like, what are you limited by currently? I guess is my curiosity.
Right. Well, with COBOL, you've got a lot of limitations, but it's not make or break.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also like with Java, you throw it out there. But like if you say JVM, and you let you could do Scala or
you can. There's a whole bunch of things that you can use to target to run off the JVM, right? And I suspect that as much of it is probably, okay, fine, there's the business logic in COBOL. I don't know if they're running off, I might guess that the underlying database is some version of DB2. But, my guess would also be you've got a idiosyncratic, decades old limitations in terms of your database, right? And then just migrating that is super difficult. If you wanted to do that. So you've got to be pretty intentional about the kind of workarounds that you do or how you extend that, or how you're going to think about the schema for it and the limitations that you've got there. But those things, the way that we've talked about them before is that they're not impossible. They are hard, and you've got to spend effort on them. and to do them well, hard means you've actually got to spend the time and be resourced and do it intentionally. But it's not impossible.
Yeah, and also back to the conversation about like why are you doing it, the rewrite to begin with. There's the fraud one. Okay, sure,
Right.
there's inefficiencies in it, but if you found fraud, that's not the same thing as the service is not running efficiently
Right.
necessarily. Like the machine could be running efficiently, but people could still find a way to exploit it. Sure, those
Yeah.
are separate things. So I'm still curious to know, like, again, like we also have people who are business oriented in
Yeah.
charge of something that's a service.
Right.
It's like people criticizing the U.S. Postal Service, like
Right.
it's not making any money. You're like, well,
Yeah. It's like
it's
not
supposed to serve
to.
people.
Yeah.
They'll deliver to any address, as inconvenient as it might be. It's for service. It's not necessarily there to make the whole country as much money as possible. But you have people with that mindset in charge of it too. So I think there's a lot of conflicting ideologies and conflicting reasons for doing this too, that kind of make it just a what is going on kind of question whenever I hear somebody say, let's just introduce all this risk into the system.
Yeah.
For what? Can we find people who are fraudulently, if they are,
Right.
exploiting this, and fix that in the current system? Do you
Right.
have to rewrite it in Java to fix the fraud? Like, where are we going with this?
Yeah. And one of the analogies that I made when I was trying to explain the potential risk to Wired was, if you want a recent example of how a rewrite can go wrong for a company, then tell me how your Sonos stuff is working right now. Right.
We've talked about this, yeah.
Yeah, and I was kind of guessing that you've probably talked about that, and I think there's a whole bunch of theories about why they decided they needed to do that. From they were launching a new line of products, and then that required a new architecture, and they also decided to do
from one of the quotes, part of it was that the leadership at Sonos thought that they were being bold and strong leaders by making a decision. We are going to get rid of this old stuff, and we're going to move on to the new age, and we're going to cut away this 20 years of cruft. And they thought they're being bold and decisive, and instead they wrecked the company.
Yeah.
Well, that's the crazy part about it is, what was it, like $500 million or something in market value? The CEO had resigned, all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. That's a sound company.
Yeah. So that was so that was my point. It was like that's just the people who make the speak. Like, you could live without them. I have a bunch of HomePod minis and everything, and it's definitely not as good as anything like the Sonos stuff that I definitely don't think is as good a product or a service as what Sonos does. But that was the point that I was trying to make, is like, people try to do, it's not just government. Jamie Zawinski has a whole point about, like, don't rewrite your code. I was saying, if you want to give like a really good example that your readers probably have experience with, it's ask them how their Sonos stuff is doing. Yeah. Right now. And because, again, it took them a whole bunch of time. From what I understand, they'd been working on it for years. Anyway.
4 years, I think.
Right. So that's not a 3-month thing. And again, it was still scoped down. Right. So when it launched, it still didn't do a whole bunch of stuff that people were used to. It still doesn't do a bunch of that stuff now.
And the developers knew it, and they were overridden.
Right. Yeah. And the only, so I hadn't heard the story about, okay, well, it's leadership and it's our job to make difficult decisions, and we're going to, I think there's a bit of a cult in Silicon Valley about, like, we're going to make hard decisions, like get rid of the headphone jack. It's like, well, you're not Apple. You don't have an entire ecosystem where if you get rid of the headphone jack, you also have the phone that everyone wants, and everyone's just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And how many people have that Apple VR thing, right? I mean, they fail all the time.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you made that bold decision. It's like, well, okay, but did you understand that the decision that you were making was, that's the strategic advantage to your business or your company isn't the fact that you've got speakers. It's the fact that the speakers work with the software. It's like you're a software business as much as you are a hardware business. Mm-hmm. And people only care if they can listen to their music.
That's one of the questions that runs in my mind with the Social Security stuff, to bring it back. Like, outside of the government, we see Social Security, it's a pension program, right? You They
Yeah.
Right.
charge dues via taxes. They pay you back out. But the people who traditionally hate Social Security, they view it as a taxation system, which has this problem of then giving rebates and giving the
Right.
taxes back, with the
Right.
potential of losing tax money in the end.
Right.
And with this whole rewrite, I'm like, I wonder if that's the thing that they want to fix. Is this, well, in 5 years or so, Social Security is supposed to start losing money, but the government's going to have to pitch in to make up a
Yeah.
shortfall.
Yeah. But my understanding, I'm an immigrant. My understanding is that that's the deal. They're calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme, right? So we have to keep paying into it because the people who are paying into it now are paying for the people who are getting out of it now. So you have to keep paying into it to ensure that the future payouts work for everyone. And I'm kind of like, well, that's a societal decision,
Yeah.
and that's okay, right? It's not, we voted for that in terms of legislation. No one has wanted to repeal it or anything. If there happen to be a small number of people who seem to think that they have paid into Social Security and they would essentially just like to withdraw it now from the account and say, right, take backsies. I want everything back that I put in. I don't want it to go towards contributing to anyone else. Then, let's actually run on that. Someone should run on that. That's a,
Good luck.
when it comes down to it, then that's your, that's the kind of business decision that's inextricably linked from a product decision. You're deciding what your product does. I saw one. I think it was a reference to a leaked conversation where they were saying, Social Security can't be that complicated. It's equivalent to a it's equivalent to a mid-sized bank, right? And then someone was pointing out mid-sized banks don't run the number of transactions, the volume of transactions that Social Security does every single night. Like
Yeah.
it's big.
Yeah.
You might be able to compare it to a mid-sized bank in some other cases, but unlike a bank, like you guys are saying, Social Security doesn't have a choice. It has to serve everyone. It has every single customer, and that's the thing I think about scope, and that's also I think the thing about rewriting and legacy modernization is hard no matter where you do it, right? I think it's doubly hard in government because you have got people in leadership positions who don't really know technology that much, because at this point anyone who's in a leadership position didn't realize they didn't realize that it was going to be their job essentially to babysit technology projects. I would talk to a secretary of Health and Human Services in California, and he was like, I thought this job would be about healthcare, right, and social services, but it turns out that most of my work is babysitting technology fuck ups and technology systems, because it turns out in this day and age, the only way you can deliver your program, right, is with a giant software system.
Yeah.
So you end up having to manage that. And the problem with, Sonos can make a decision and then they get hit in the stock market, and it's, they can feel like they're making a bold decision and say, right, we're going to cut these features. But in government, you're going to have every single stakeholder saying, I don't want you to cut those features. And it is, we know how political things get in the business environment. We know what business politics get like. I was working on a $500 million modernization, effectively a rewrite of the child welfare information system in California. And there's 50 counties in California. So you've got every single one of them as a customer that you have to listen to, in some cases by law that you have to listen to. And then you've got that disparity between the tiniest county in California and you've got LA County on the other end. So then now you have to make roadmap decisions, right? We would always say to them, well, you can't do everything at once. You can't tell everyone that you're going to get everything at once. You have to prioritize, and you're going to have to make, this is the difficult decision. You're going to have to make the decision. Are you going to tell LA County that they have to wait? Do LA County have something over you? Do you find that, do you find that sweet spot where you find something that the smaller county needs that LA County is also happy with, and you've got to do that entire thing with wins. I know where the 3 months come from, because you've got 3 months to win people's trust. They've been waiting forever to get better software or stuff that works. They've always been let down by every attempt to either provide new stuff, or every time they're sold something new and say, "Great, we've got this great new system." It's like, yeah, but it's not. In a lot of ways, it's not as good. Like, yes, it does some things that the old one didn't do, but in a lot of ways, it just isn't as good.
Yes.
All right. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think we should wrap it up. Thank you so much, Dan. If people want to get in touch with you or learn more, or come knocking at your door with government projects, because that's how that works.
Honestly, these days I'm as open to private sector stuff as I am government. I kind of fell into all the government stuff with an accidental public service thing. I was asked to provide some feedback on the procurement for that new child welfare system in California, and essentially my report was, well, this is fucked up. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do this a different way if you do this a giant waterfall, giant, and you don't break it up into smaller pieces. But
I want to have you back on to talk about that, because that sounds awesome.
That does sound like a great. We have a fuck up Friday episode every now and then where we talk about a great fuck up.
But the best way to get in touch with me is at my website for my company, which is at verylittlegravitas.com. And there should be Calendly links there as well. So if anyone wants to chat, I love chatting to people. I talk a lot.
That is indeed how we got in touch with you.
Yeah. you can grab a slot and we'll chat for half an hour.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
That's Dan Hon, and I'm Isaac Askew.
Thanks very much.